Hey, let's try this. The holidays are upon us, so I would just like to say, we here at KlugeCast, whatever your creed, whatever your beliefs, be you observing Ponda Days, Lexus December to Remember, Toyotathon, Ford built for the holidays, whatever it is that Fiat does.
I would never jingle your bells.
I want to wish you and yours a happy holidays and a fantastic new year. On that note, what's more festive than talking about motor oil and inductive coupled plasma spectrometry? In the 6 years that I've been working on my BMW Z3, I've been pretty obsessive not just about changing the oil, but also having that oil sent off to be analyzed in a lab. And over 6 years of collecting oil samples and getting oil reports back, I haven't made a video about that until this one. Now, why go through all the trouble of sending your motor oil off to a lab? Well, for one, as the metal bits inside of your engine, like the piston rings and bearings start to wear, some of those metals like copper, iron, aluminum, lead, and chromium will inevitably end up in your motor oil. So if the oil gets analyzed and has a high concentration of these wear metals, that could be a sign that your engine might need some work done in the near future. It's not just about those wear metals, though. A good oil analysis will also tell you if there's things like sodium and antifreeze in your oil, which could mean that you have a bad head gasket or even a cracked cylinder head. It could also tell you if there's an unusual amount of fuel in your oil, which does reduce the ability for oil to lubricate and could point to a fuel system problem like a leaky injector. One oil analysis can help you identify a problem before it becomes a catastrophe, but a series of oil analyses over an engine's lifespan can potentially tell you a story, how it's breaking in, how it's wearing, and when it's done with your bullshit. You shouldn't have to be a scientist to make sense of an oil analysis, though. A good oil analysis service should be able to tell you what they see in your oil and what that could mean for your engine. That brings me to my own oil analysis reports, which I have right here.
We're not walking away today. We're going to find out what.
For the past 6 years, I've been submitting oil samples to Blackstone Laboratories of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and to see what they can tell me about my engines. As some background, all the cars in my care get an oil and oil filter change every 6,000 miles with synthetic, high-quality oil and an OEM or other high-quality oil filter. And I always collect a sample of that spent oil to send off to Blackstone Labs. Collecting those samples used to mean holding a sample container under the stream of oil while the engine was draining, but lately I've been using a nifty little hand pump here that's designed to fit those sample containers exactly from Blackstone Labs, and it's just a whole lot easier. Now the Z3 doesn't get driven 6,000 miles in a year, so inevitably I change its oil annually every November, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 5,000 miles. And after 6 years of oil samples getting analyzed from the Z3, this is what the oil report looks like from Blackstone Labs.
In the case of 11-month-old
Ultima,
Drew, you are not.
Each report comes with a description where the lab tech tells you in plain English what they found in your oil. You might get recommendations or things to watch out for here. Then for the truly nerdy, Blackstone prints out the elemental content of your oil in parts per million. More on that later. And finally, at the bottom of the report, we have the section for other properties. We have viscosity and flash point, both of which relate to the quality and the condition of the oil. Viscosity, as you might know, is how thick or thin the oil is, which affects its ability to flow and lubricate the engine. A sample that has a lower viscosity than the desired range, shown here in this column, could have some fuel or antifreeze contamination. A sample with a higher than ideal viscosity could be due to high levels of soot or some kind of oil additive. Flash point is the lowest temperature that will ignite the oil, and generally speaking you want a high flash point because that means your oil can withstand higher temperatures and abuse before it breaks down. And like with viscosity, fuel and water contamination will mean a lower flash point here as well. If you keep sending in oil samples for the same engine to the same lab, like I did here, you'll have those printed out in separate columns for comparison, along with an average for all your samples. At this point you might be wondering what are good numbers and what are bad numbers. Blackstone will also give you a column for universal averages, so that you can compare samples against other samples that Blackstone has received over the years from other customers for your same engine model. Blackstone also highlights numbers that it thinks are out of spec. You know, something that I've wondered personally about these numbers is, how are they affected by mileage on the oil? In other words, if I have an oil sample with 5,000 miles on it and another oil sample with just 2,000 miles on it, How comparable are those results? Now, what I first thought, since these wear metals are cumulative, is that you'd want to divide the parts per million by the mileage to get a more accurate comparison between two samples of different mileage. But I didn't see this anywhere in the analysis, and I didn't see it on the Blackstone website, so I asked Blackstone directly, and this is what they had to say. Not all engines wear exactly like averages, so trends are the best way to gauge wear. When averages show typical wear after 10,000 miles, but the oil was only in use for 3,000 miles, we can see if the engine left less metal behind like we'd expect. Iron is the metal that tracks with oil use the most, so it tends to fluctuate depending on how long the oil is in use. Longer runs equal more iron and vice versa. Other wear metals don't typically track with oil use like iron does. They may increase after longer runs, but to a much lesser extent. I would expect a similar amount of aluminum after 10,000 miles as I would after 3,000 miles, for example. For that reason, checking the wear rates and parts per million per mile isn't always useful. It helps when evaluating iron because it tracks with oil use, but not so much for other metals. Other metals should stay closer to the average levels, even after longer runs. Makes sense to me. Iron tracks with mileage much stronger than other wear metals, so unless you're really abusing your engine, you don't need to go through any extra math to compare these numbers. Just compare the parts per million directly between your samples. Anyway, there you have it. That's what 6 years of annual oil samples looks like for this BMW Z3. So what does it all mean for this humble little 6-cylinder M52 TU 2.5 liter engine? Now, I'm not going to get into all of the elements from all 6 years. You've already seen that table. So I picked out just 3 that are strong indicators of wear. We've got aluminum, iron, and lead. Aluminum can be found in pistons, bearings, and the head and block of this all-aluminum M52 TU engine. Iron comes from steel parts of the engine like the crank, cylinder liners, piston rings, and also the valve train. And then we have lead, which in addition to aluminum, you can find in the rod bearings. First, with the exception of that first oil sample in 2017, the metal content has been consistently below the universal average, which bodes well. I should probably also mention that this engine consumes basically no oil between oil changes, despite now pushing 140,000 miles. So those things together point to a pretty robust engine. So well done, BMW, and also well done, previous BMW owner. Interestingly, the lead levels in the oil have been in a mostly downward trend since the first oil change, which means low and consistent wear on the rod bearings. The aluminum levels have bounced around the universal average of 3 parts per million, which suggests the block, head, and pistons are in comparable shape as their M52 brethren, and really just seems to confirm the fact that aluminum isn't as strong an indicator of wear as the other metals. Then we have iron, which, again, except for that first oil sample in 2017, has been consistently below the universal average of 10 parts per million, but saw a slight uptick in 2020 before plunging in later years. I would expect that most of this iron came from the piston rings and cylinder liners. Given all that, what happened in 2020 that caused more iron and lead to end up in the oil? Was I a little harder on the car? Where did I go wrong? Oh right, I flogged this car doing autocross. I drove the Z3 in 5 events in 2019 and 8 events in 2020. Was the class champion in 2020 despite not actually being fast and never finishing first in class. I guess it just goes to show you that consistent mediocrity is the way to go. You know, taking a look at all this data, I think it's safe to say that the key to low engine wear all comes down to basic maintenance. Use high-quality synthetic oils, high-quality filters, and change consistently at a low interval or every year at a minimum. An oil analysis can be a little pricey at around $35 a pop, and that can add up if you're doing this multiple times a year on multiple vehicles. Having said that, an analysis of your oil is a more scientifically rigorous way to know if you're treating your engine right, and again may give you a little advance warning of a potential issue. This probably won't be my last video about motor oil. I still have some interesting results to share from my 2021 Subaru Crosstrek Sport, which I bought from brand new and now has around 15,000 miles, and those oil analyses cover basically the break-in of a brand new Subaru FB engine, which is pretty neat. So more to come eventually, but that's all for now. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you down the road.
I would never jingle your bells.